here today debating this bill as a direct consequence of the free vote of the British people in the referendum last year, where they gave their explicit instruction to us that we were to withdraw the United Kingdom from the European Union. There was an extraordinary article by a member of the other place in the Mail on Sunday yesterday who said the government were rushing this decision because they were afraid that the people would get their hands on the decision. It is because the people did get their hands on the decision and made the decision to leave that we are here today. Now, many of us who campaigned in that referendum to leave did not do so out of any sense of flippantness. I came to that conclusion over a long period. I came to it disappointed after decades of listening to successive governments and successive prime ministers talking about how we were going to reform the European Union from inside, how we were going to have subsidiarity and all of the rest of that. And this body gradually acquired all the attributes of statehood: a citizenship, a flag, an anthem, a currency, a parliament, and a Supreme Court. For me, it became the antithesis of what an independent nation-state was all about. And those of us who campaigned to leave were very clear in our objectives. We wanted to make our own laws in this country. We wanted to sign our own trade deals. And we wanted to end the massive payments to the European Union and decide on our own immigration policy. Mr. Speaker, that is what this bill sets us on the road to do. Clause 1 makes clear that the European Communities Act will cease to apply on the day we leave the European Union, and it provides that the day after that exit, it will be this House and our courts that are supreme in making the decisions that affect us in this country. And it is the mechanism to transfer the body of law that we live under today, much of which emanated from the European Union over the last nearly 45 years, is transposed into United Kingdom law. But, Mr. Speaker, it quite rightly makes little mention of some of the fundamental things that affect us as a country. For correctly and properly, the government have committed to bring in legislation on the floor of this House on some of the big matters: bills before Parliament, a customs bill, a trade bill, an immigration bill, a fisheries bill, an agricultural bill, nuclear safeguards bill, an international sanctions bill, all announced in the gracious speech after the general election this year. It also puts specific limits on the powers laid down in this. Under this, the government cannot make regulations to impose or increase taxation. It cannot make retrospective provisions. It cannot create relevant criminal offences. It cannot make regulations to implement the withdrawal agreement. And crucially, it does provide a sunset clause that means that 2 years after this, we leave the European Union, this will cease to apply. Now, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I will be 45 in 2 weeks' time. Her Majesty gave royal assent to the European Communities Act 1972 just a month after I was born. And I wasn't, although I got political awareness reasonably early on in my life, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't politically aware throughout the entirety of that almost 45 years. But I don't recall, in the period that I was politically aware, great complaints emanating from all parts of this House about the constant stream of legislation that came from the European Union, unscrutinised, implemented, we had to obey. It is this government that is putting that sunset clause into place. And I am sorry to see the honourable member, the member for Wolverhampton South East, who said that there was some confusion on these benches, some difference of opinion between members on these benches about what our policy on leaving the European Union was. I have to say he could have easily and perhaps more effectively directed that at his own front bench. The Shadow Home Secretary supports free movement. The Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Brexit Secretary say it must end. The Deputy Leader says we would stay in the single market forever. The Shadow Chancellor says we should leave the single market to respect the referendum. The Shadow Trade Secretary has described staying in the Customs Union as a disaster, and the Shadow Brexit Secretary supports staying in a customs union, while the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party says we could stay in the customs union indefinitely. Mr. Speaker, one could be forgiven for thinking that honourable gentlemen opposite and their ladies on the front bench are getting their inspiration from Heinz, the 57 varieties of Brexit that are on offer. And while the government introduced a sunset clause into this bill to make sure that the measures, the provisions laid out in it can't last for more than 2 years, the policy of the Labour Party on Brexit can barely last 2 days. And if it lasts 2 weeks, it appears to be a long-term policy indeed. Mr. Speaker, prior to the general election, this House voted overwhelmingly in favour of the notification of withdrawal bill. I think tonight the House should do the same in second reading for this bill before Parliament. In the words of one of my more succinct correspondents, Mr. Speaker, who wrote to me yesterday, tell the House, for goodness sake, just get on with it.
Chris Bryant.